Good morning. Last week, Father's Day, the lectionary had us read about Abraham sending away his son Ishmael along with his surrogate mother. And I remember thinking harshly of Abraham when I read it, as I did not appreciate his treatment of them. Then this week, chapter 22 tells the story of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his long-awaited, much-beloved son, the son of promise. Sometimes when I read stories in the Bible in isolation, out of context, it's easy for me to judge the principal actors harshly. I know in reading about the sacrifice of Isaac, I've sometimes thought, Abraham, how could you? What are you thinking? Rather than appreciating his faith, I focus on his parenting. I cannot imagine that I could have trusted God as he did, not with my child. In the story, the angel of the Lord just speaks to Abraham, just his name, Abraham. And he says, here I am. The Lord says, take your son 3 days' journey away and offer him there in the place that I will show you. Offer him. Abraham doesn't even blink. It appears he just accepts this and begins his preparations. Everyone knew where they were going. They took wood for the offering. They took the fire. They took the knife. They knew exactly what preparations needed to be made for the familiar sacrifice. They were going to go. They were going to worship, make an offering, and return. As they drew somewhat close, you remember he leaves the servants who accompanied them with the donkeys, and he just goes on alone with just Isaac. Don't know exactly how old Isaac is, but he's obviously old enough to carry the wood and to make observations and ask pertinent questions. Isaac asks, where is the lamb? And Abraham says, God himself will provide the lamb. Then the story moves almost immediately to this surreal scene on the mountain that seems calm and almost normal. Abraham binds his son Isaac and lays him on the altar. There doesn't seem to be any indication that there's fear or panic on Isaac's part, or that there's a struggle or any hesitation on Abraham's part. What were they thinking? I wonder. Did Abraham think that he would sacrifice his, kill him, and that God would then raise him from the dead? Did Isaac think that too? I'm not sure, but I know looking at the context helps me to understand what's happening. So Abraham has trusted God enough to travel to only God knows where. They obviously have a relationship rooted in trust. And in chapter 15, this amazing promise that God makes to him with this amazing show of the covenant where the fire passes between the animals split apart. And he's promised that his son, his heir, will become the father of nations, that his descendants will outnumber the stars, and that through his seed, all the nations of the world will be blessed. Then 10 or more years go by with no children. Abraham sees the birth of Ishmael through his servant offered as a surrogate. 15 more years go by, and God says, this boy won't be the heir. In chapter 17, God changes Abram's name to Abraham, father of nations, it means, and reiterates his promise that his descendants will be multiple. And he confirmed his covenant with him that through his descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, and promises him that Sarah will be the one to bear this son. Then in chapter 18, Abraham's visited by a group of angels, including one called the angel of the Lord. They come and visit, tell him in person that the very next year, Isaac, his son, will be born. And they reiterate this promise once again. Then in chapter 21, the birth of Isaac. So this story comes at the end of a string of promises and visitations by God and the angel of the Lord, where Abraham is told over and over that he will have a son, and that son will become the father of multiple nations, and that his descendants will go on to be a blessing for all the earth. I think if that I had had that kind of relationship with God, that intimacy, that confidence, maybe I would look at the story a little differently. So it looks like Abraham reaches out his hand to slay his son. And when he does, the angel of the Lord says his name again, this time twice. Abraham, Abraham. The translation I have in front of me has Abraham, period, then Abraham with an exclamation point, almost to get his attention quickly, and says, you can stop. I want to read verses 12 through 14. So the angel of the Lord, the same one who visited him and promised him that Isaac would be born, the angel of the Lord calls to him from heaven and says, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham says again, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord, it shall be provided. The angel's voice was familiar and trusted. And of course, God provides the sacrificial lamb caught in a crown of thorns, no less, as a substitute for Isaac, for us. And Abraham names the place, the mountain where the Lord provides. This is one of my favorite names for God, Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. I desire to have that kind of faith and confidence in God that Abraham showed. I distinctly recall after my husband died, begging God to allow me to raise my children, to protect them from harm, keep them safe. I could not imagine any greater sorrow than to surrender a child, even into the loving arms of God. I desire to have the relationship that Abraham had with Jesus, the angel of the Lord, that will allow me to calm my fears, yield my hopes and dreams, and be able to stretch out a steady hand, unquestioning, like Abraham did, not asking why, without lament, just trusting God to keep his promises, trusting that he's faithful and that he will provide. When I hear his familiar voice, I want to reply, here I am, as surely as Abraham did. Did you know that I named my firstborn son Abraham? He's a daily reminder to me of the faithfulness of God. And that is good news.